We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask why.
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Hey Gaia, what's our topic for today?
So today we were going to pick up a topic that is very broad and try to bring it down into something actually possible to fill in one episode.
Yeah, when you pitched this to me, I was like, I think we could do an episode on that. And then I was like, well, maybe a series of episodes. So in this one, I think
Maybe
we're
another
answering...
podcast.
Yeah, I think in this one, we're answering something very specific about the idea.
Yeah, so we want to talk about multiplayer games versus single player games, but we have one question to answer through the totality of this episode, the whole of the episode. Why is it so hard to make single player games multiplayer? And for this, we brought along one of our friends who has opinions that we shall determine if they're valid or not. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Sam. I'm Gaia's friend, I guess.
One of my classmates,
Yep.
pretty much.
Just showed up
Who-
in the studio today and we were having a conversation. We were like, hey, do you want to be on the show?
And you've played video games, I hope?
I have played video games.
So,
That's true.
I think it's a little obvious with today's episode topic that we're going to be talking pretty much only about video games. Some of these concepts will hold with board games. There are single player and multiplayer board games, obviously, but
Yeah, but they're kind of fundamentally multiplayer games, and then sometimes you can play them alone.
yeah, and
Which is-
video games have a harder time with choosing what they want to be. Think about what are some of the first video games: Pong, fundamentally multiplayer; Tetris, single player with scoreboards; and Mario, which single player. Like even the history of video games has been very unclear on if they should be single player or multiplayer or something in between, like what Tetris does. So today it's all about why is it so hard to turn single player games multiplayer. So as a little bit of an introduction on this topic, we need to understand what are the primary challenges when making games multiplayer in the first place. And I have a whole notes document on this. So to give a bit of structure to the episode, we're going to start off with talking pretty briefly about the actual hardware difficulty of making multiplayer games, from the difference of local multiplayer with split screen or online multiplayer with the internet. Pause for dramatic effect, just the horrors of the internet. And then after that, it's all about the game design that is very difficult about making multiplayer games. So I'll start off with actually throwing out a bit of a question for the discussion on the hardware side of things. What do either of you or both of you think is hard about actually building multiplayer games? This can be either local multiplayer or online multiplayer. What do you think is the hard part of actually making a game multiplayer in terms of hardware, like building it?
I don't know a whole lot about this, but my instinct is that making a split screen local multiplayer is a lot easier than doing something online that requires like syncing with somebody else.
Yes.
Okay.
Sam, opinions?
Yeah, I agree with that. But even looking at that split screen multiplayer, I mean, there was the classic like, hey, you're peeking. Like you have to like balance the game so that you can see what the other person is doing at all times, and that's got to be difficult as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, like when I was a kid, the totality of my experience of playing with a video game with another person was just not being able to figure out which screen I was on a split screen. So I imagine from a programming standpoint, that's probably
So you're telling me you played
harder.
Mario Kart?
Yeah. Yeah, there's one other that I have in mind, but I don't remember what the game was called.
Yeah, I have no clue. GoldenEye?
Yeah, who knows?
Screen peeking on GoldenEye. Oh gosh. So you're right. Local multiplayer is easier but has its own challenges. To think of a few, if we're going to go back a really long time ago in programming, how do you know which controller each button input came from when you're making a game? How do you know that a button was pressed on controller 1 versus controller 2? How do you know how the game should respond to each one, and how does the game process two different independent actions at the same time plus the actual game? Were all actual challenges.
well,
Now-
you got different ports for the different controllers,
Well,
right?
that's eventually what the result became, is that you check which port the controller's from and just keep track of which port is which. But that wasn't always how we originally began. I think by the time the NES came out, it was very obvious that that's what you should do, but what games do you think were multiplayer on the Nintendo Entertainment
Did you just
System?
call the NES the NES?
Is that
Is
not-
that no? Did
that
you
not
just
what people
no?
call it?
You don't.
No.
I've never heard
That's-
anybody just say the acronym as a word. Are
Definitely like saying lol instead of LOL.
Got it. Okay, cool. But you're right when you say online multiplayer is much harder. And as the computer science nerd in the room, I'll take center stage on this one. Some of the biggest issues with doing online multiplayer is Well, let's first ask the simple question, how do you synchronize actions between two people? Well, now you have to ask, what type of system for multiplayer are you even using? Is there a server that both users send inputs to that then tells them what happens, or do they just simply send to each other directly what's happening? The first is known as client-server, and the second is peer-to-peer, and both of them suck.
Okay.
There's nothing really good about either one.
I was like, both of these sound like a way to introduce lag into online play.
Well, peer-to-peer is less laggy, but if you've ever tried to do it with a phone, it just crashes routinely, non-stop, just crashing.
Excellent.
But yeah, that's one of the big issues. Or let's say you do an action in a game, and your friend does a different action that is exclusive to it. So like you can only do one at the same time, and they both reach the server at the same time.
Oh.
Which one does the server accept? Or does it accept both and cause a problem with the game? Until not that long ago, accepting both was just the default because you didn't program it around that. And that's a problem. That's usually how you soft lock your games. But you can have other issues in this as well, such as how does lag work? Do you need some system of understanding, like when a hit, like when you actually hit an opponent, when does it register? If you've ever played TF2, you know what it's like when that's done wrong, just to say. But to avoid going forever into this, there's a lot of problems communicating online. And of course, internet being unstable and having to program around networks is also not a very fun action. So yeah, multiplayer programming is hard.
And this is on top of even like trying to figure out what multiplayer looks like within a game that was single player to begin with.
Yeah, we have not yet designed a multiplayer game. We've just asked, how does it run? And the question is, the answer is barely. Right?
With great difficulty.
My favorite description of network computing from my course I took in it is all computer networks are held together with duct tape.
Yeah.
And everything they're built on is held together with duct tape.
That seems extremely reasonable.
Like half of them are built on GitHub repositories that haven't been updated in 11 years by some guy named Bart, which is like Bart's Internet Thing is what it's officially called.
Yeah.
And that half of all internet websites use that exclusively.
Yeah, this is very much like this is maintained by one guy in Ohio in his basement, and it's like what we've built the foundation of a lot of internet stuff on.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think all of the code I've written is based on Bart's Internet Thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, pretty much.
I can see how that would be the case for even a higher code. Like,
Bart's really the workhorse for this.
Bart's really out here.
So
this episode dedicated to Bart.
dedicated to Bart. So this is one of the major challenges of multiplayer programming. But let's say that we have it programmed, that we know the system we're using. Let's say client server, easy answer. We have the kinks worked out in it. We know everything's going to happen. Now we actually have to build a game. And remember, the question is take a single player game, make it multiplayer. So I'll throw this question out again to both of you to talk about. What do you think is hard from a design standpoint of making a single player game into a multiplayer game? Or even just building a multiplayer game in general if you want to go really deep into it.
Well, so my instinct was this is to like picture a game and then picture what the role of the second person would be. Like I'm trying to imagine playing something like The Witcher 3 and then having another person be there. I'm like, so do you take the role of like an NPC? Do we create a new character for you? Like what happens in this setting? And also like some of the stuff for those games are like very specific to the fact that you are one person. And also all of the bosses and stuff are sort of leveled to be defeatable by one person.
Well, you're Geralt in that story.
Yeah.
And Geralt has a story. He has the story of The Witcher from, like, the books. Yeah, if you bring in a second character, you'd have to, like, work out how, like, I don't know, Dandelion is his name, right?
Yeah.
Could follow Geralt on his adventures,
and
maybe?
then like are you Geralt part 2? Like do we just do another one of you, or do you play Ciri, but you can't play Ciri because she's fundamental to something else that's happening, like she's the reason the game is happening.
Yeah, she's in another storyline that's part of the main first player storyline.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me it becomes a whole like problem in narrative, and that doesn't even touch like what it looks like on the developer side.
I think the only way you could do it would be, have you guys played God of War?
I've seen gameplay of it at least.
There's like, so you have Kratos that you control. That's like the main first player. But then there's also his son. What's his name? I don't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, I have no idea.
We got Geralt, and then we got his son, or not Geralt, sorry. We got Kratos.
Geralt, now in God of War.
God of War featuring Geralt from The Witcher.
Geralt is the God of War.
Surprise guest. Yeah.
Oh man.
So we got Kratos, the God of War, and his son, who's new to like the new games.
Yeah.
And through like the single player story mode, they don't have a multiplayer in that game. But his son is like an integral character that follows you throughout the entire game, controlled by AI. So I could see a game like that having like a second player play the son.
Right.
So a game that has a second player could have a second
player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are right about that. There are games that take it much more naturally in going on moving into multiplayer. But I heard one part of this that I think is really good to focus on of what happens to the story. Like, let's
Yeah.
think of The Witcher. The Witcher has, well, Witcher 3 specifically,
Yeah.
has a lot of cutscenes. And all of those cutscenes are Geralt, is how you
Yeah.
pronounce it?
Sure.
Geralt interacting with people, talking with people, or having events happen usually to him specifically.
Yeah.
You haven't. If you were to have another player, do the cutscenes work for that player? Is the player just kind of hanging around for fun? Does he get anything from the story?
My other thought now that we're talking about this is like, when do you introduce the fact that you have another person? Like, is this the kind of game like Age of Calamity, like the prequel to Breath of the Wild, where you like you can just throw in another person because it's a battle royale anyway and it doesn't matter? Like, or do you have to start from the beginning where you're always going to be playing with a second person? Because that's the only way, like, The Witcher 3 would work. You can't just throw Dandelion into a lot of those cutscenes. Like,
Well, I do have the question then. Why can't you?
Because if he was sitting in the back of like that bath scene at the start of
Yeah.
The Witcher 3, like,
we'd be like, oh,
very
Dandelion's here.
different,
Yeah.
very, very different like style of scene. You know?
Yeah.
It changes a lot. And
Yeah, it's the equivalent of like us recording this show and then there just being a guy in the corner, like.
yeah, it would be like
Yeah.
if we didn't introduce Sam and he just speaks a half an hour in.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Or I just crouch in the corner and watch.
Yeah.
That's like what I'm imagining.
True.
Loot at the ready.
Loot at the ready. I think
Yeah.
it'd be hilarious to have a little loot playing in the background for random bits of the episode.
Yeah.
But you are getting it exactly right there of immersion or just the feeling of playing a game is a big part of the game.
Yeah, we've talked about like gaming being a lot of like sort of escapism, and the reason we do video games is because we're interested in experiencing story and in, you know, not being here on this, you know, mortal realm. And I
this
feel
plane.
on this plane, and you lose it when you, I think, add something that is distracting. In theater, you have like the suspension of disbelief, right? And as soon as you sort of break that by there being a quality of something that doesn't like mesh with the whole storyline, that happens really easily in video games, and it can take you out of it really quickly. It's, again, one of those things where we look at, you don't notice it when it isn't there, but when that quality is there, you notice it, and it's a problem.
Yeah, it's one of those things of your enjoyment, your feeling of playing a game, or just your ability to focus on the game only and not think about other things depends on feeling like you're in the game. And video games in particular have it the hardest because you're interacting with the game. You have to feel like your actions are actually happening because they're behind a controller. And the second you stop and you say, I'm using a controller, games feel weird.
Yeah.
Like, you know that feeling when you forget which button you have to press and suddenly you're just staring at a controller, figuring it out?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of picking up the game after a while and being like, oh, I remember being okay at this, and now I don't remember how to swing my sword. Like,
Well, yeah, you go from this like level 100,
Yeah.
like dragonborn, to
Yeah.
suddenly, I don't know how to shout. I don't know how to
yeah,
do magic.
I don't know how to shout. Yeah, we're playing Skyrim.
It's actually, Skyrim has a very similar issue as well of when you have to open your inventory. It completely breaking the
yeah.
immersion.
Yeah.
Right? But let's also ask the question, let's say you're in multiplayer and there's situations that pause the game, like opening your inventory to eat 63 wheels of cheese in Skyrim.
Yeah.
Does the game pause for the other player when you do open your inventory, or should the game
Yeah.
never pause? Now, the solution most games have found is not pausing, but if your game is built around the ability to stop and think, multiplayer will break that. So
Yeah.
now you can't design it that way. Or let me ask just a completely different question. Think about games that have individualized battle systems, right? So you enter a fight like Pokemon or like Final Fantasy or like Persona. If you enter a fight and you have a friend who's playing, does your friend automatically enter that fight? Or can your friend enter the fight later? Could they walk up and join the fight and join into the turn structure? Or is this just an invisible box that you're fighting in that your friend has no ability to interact with?
Well, Pokemon, you either start the fight with a friend or they're not in the
Well,
fight.
Pokemon also doesn't have multiplayer like this, admittedly, like walking around the world with a friend.
Yes,
but
it's like 1.5 multiplayer. Like we were
yeah,
talking
but
about
this
for the
is
episode.
genuinely a question when doing multiplayer. How do battle systems work if you're going from a single player game with battle systems to a multiplayer game?
I don't have an answer. I'm like sitting here like trying to imagine where you make that decision. And it's so hard because like changing a game from single player to multiplayer is like fundamentally very, very difficult because of so many more things than I had thought. But now we're like asking the questions that are really making like the fact that you started with a fully built game and are not starting by building a multiplayer game totally changes how you approach this, right? You're building a multiplayer game, you just answer that question. You're playing a single player game and now you're like, but how does that change from the original game and the experience of playing the original game, which is why people want to play with their friends? Those are hard questions, Gaia.
And with Pokemon, or other battle systems like that, you could have the answer that when a battle starts, it has like a waiting to start option where your friend has a few seconds to come join to make it a double battle. And if they miss the window, they miss the window. That's the easiest way to allow your friend to join battles, but also have like a fixed system. But that's only one question.
That's also not like that fun, just sitting there waiting for your battle to start, especially if you've agreed with your friend like before this. No, I don't really want to wait for you to show up from halfway across the world.
Or worse, like your sibling. And then your sibling's like, you were too late and now you have a problem. Like
That actually does have another question. Will the other players get bored waiting for turns to happen?
I will.
How long do you have to spend taking a turn? Will the other person be able to wait that long? Will that fundamentally change the game for them?
I think then you have to look at games that are like puzzle-based games or like strategy-based games actually might lend themselves better to being multiplayer games and are probably easier to make into multiplayer games. Like if I'm playing against like the computer in chess, I can very easily be like, all right, Gaia, like sit on the other side of the board and play with me. Or like, you know, playing Civ 6 as a multiplayer, that doesn't really rely on the timing of a server as much. Like because it's turn-based, right? I make a turn, I wait for the thing to load, you make a turn, we wait for the thing to load and continue.
Yeah. And
Lag time might add like a second, but
like not
the length of a player's turn is definitely longer than that.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be like as noticeable.
Yeah. And there is also a reasonable question of if the world has the ability for you to interact with it, when the other person interacts with it, do you see that difference? The answer seems obviously yes, but if you're solving puzzles, do you want someone to be able to walk away for like an hour and go solve all your puzzles for you while you're buying things in a shop, for example, and you just waltz on through? Do you want to allow that to happen? Do you have to keep the players in the same area? Can your game handle loading two areas at the same time?
Well, let's talk about a game that does this like really well. Like let's just talk about the Stardew Valley co-op.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a game that, you know, was single player and then was made a cooperative game, right? So not competitive at all. That feeds, you know, how Stardew Valley is just sort of built.
Yeah.
But it works really well.
Yeah. Would anyone here like to give a rundown on what Stardew Valley is like, or should I go through it?
I would definitely appreciate it if someone did.
So the main idea of Stardew Valley is you are a person who lived in the city and worked a 9 to 5, and your grandfather died and left you his entire farm, which is really run down at this point because he was getting very up there in age.
When he
in
says
his will.
farm, he's like, there's dirt and trees in the house.
Like it was a farm, and then it got really overgrown over the past like 10 years where he was, you know, very old and just a community member. You can build it up again if you want free land.
Yep.
And the whole concept of the game is there's no requirements on when you have to do things. You just do things at your own pace, and you can farm, fish, mine, forage, and there is a fighting system, mainly for fighting enemies in the mines, but there is some minor degree of fighting. And you can interact with the community and talk to people, make things and give them gifts. It's Harvest Moon and Animal Crossing in nature, but way more task-based.
And it's very much like you have a set amount of energy in the day, and that's what you use to do your farming. And when you run out of energy, you can go talk to people. And
or
so,
you can eat food, but
Yeah.
that uses up your resources, so...
And resources are kind of sort of famously hard to come by. So if you want to do a day of just farming, like you're going to be using a lot of resources to do that, as opposed to like, okay, I'm going to do this today and I'm going to do that bit tomorrow and I'm going to go fish or go talk to some people for a little bit.
Yeah. The one advantage is by going fishing or going foraging, you can get those resources. So some of your tasks let you do other tasks more if you want. But the whole big advantage is you go at your own pace and there's no strict requirements. Now, let's think, before we talk about how the game actually made multiplayer, we can actually think about how would we make this game multiplayer. For example, your farm has so much money. You know, you have so many gold pieces. I don't know what they call it, like guilders or whatever. You have so much money. Should the money be shared between players? Like, as an opinion from you two, should it? Why or why not?
The way I'd look at this would be like have 2 farms for the 2 different players playing the game, right? Like then community time is just when you interact with the other player. That's my immediate thought going into like making this multiplayer.
My thought, just based on the theme of the game, is like shared labor, right? So maybe there's 2 houses, maybe, but the farm is shared, and resources maybe are optional to share. Maybe there's some way of like, I can leave you gold coins and you can come pick them up so that you can go do something while I do this.
So split income versus joint income with a way to share. Or about the same farm, different farm problem. If the farms are big enough, why don't you just put the houses far apart?
Yeah.
So you can interact if you choose to, or have your own areas if you choose to, right? Now let's think about relationships with the community members. Should they be built together or separate?
Oh, I want like a shared option. But I also like the idea of like the guy who runs the store hates you, loves me. I think that's funny.
That sounds absolutely hilarious. It's like going to talk
Yeah.
to your friend about how
Yeah.
the shopkeeper won't let you in anymore. Or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. You're like, I really need to give a gift to this person, but they just hate me right now. And you just go do that.
Well,
Can you
Yeah.
send this note on your behalf? Like, sad. Like,
And
just barely apologizing. Like,
how about
it's
level
like
ups
middle
and
school
unlocks?
stuff.
Yeah.
Levels up and unlocks, should they be shared levels or should they be separate levels? Should the unlocks be shared or should only one person have access but they can give it to the other person? What do you think?
That one feels shared to me. That feels like a game mechanic, like kind of, it's not a resource, it feels hard to share.
So
something like-
thinking about level ups, if you were to level up your farming skill, should your friend's farming skill go up as well? Or should they be separate? Because your farming skill determines how much energy you use per action farming. It determines the value of the things that you grow, right? Or at least their rating, gold star versus no star,
Yeah.
right?
Ooh.
I come from like a fighting game background. That's like a lot of the games I play are like Smash Ultimate, like Tekken, whatever, you know, fighting games. So like my thing with games is being competitive. I would want a way to say I'm better than you at farming. Gotcha.
See, my thing is like, is it a time commitment? Because Stardew tends to be like, the more time you spend playing this game, the more you're able to play this game. And if you're doing something cooperative where one person doesn't have a lot of time and the other person has tons of time, you might come into a situation where it's like, man, I'd really love to work on my side of the farm, but I don't have any energy to do it. So maybe a way to share would be cool. I've never played the Stardew cooperative version because I don't have a lot of time. So I'm coming at this from the point of view of like, well, what if I get left behind by my friend who's playing all the time?
Then I'm better than you. That's
Then
all
I'm
I'm
better
saying.
than you.
I win.
Okay, we're never playing Stardew.
So, would you two like the answer for how Stardew made its game multiplayer?
Yes,
Yeah.
please, guys.
So-
Yes,
The first
please,
thing is,
Gaia.
you for most of these things, you're allowed to choose. You can choose split money versus joint money. You can choose your houses nearby or far apart. They did the far apart thing
Yeah,
I
okay.
mentioned, right? So
Yeah.
same farm, but the farms are huge normally. So if they're far apart, it's nearly a different farm at that point.
Right.
But there are some things that they did make a definitive choice on. Levels are separate. If you level up your farming, if you're farming and they're fishing, you level up farming, they level up fishing. But on the other hand, all the unlocks have to go through you. But if you got level 10 fishing, unlock the best fishing rod, and you want to buy a new one, you can just buy that new one and give it to your friend. That's
okay.
perfectly allowed. So the unlocks are shared, quote unquote, but they're
Gotcha.
shared so insofar as you can give things to your friend. The relationships, though, are not shared. So that
Yeah.
idea of the shopkeeper hates me, can you please go give him this? Well, hate's not really a thing in that
yeah,
game,
it's
admittedly,
not, but like,
but that is accurate.
yeah, okay, I like that.
This person hasn't talked to me. Can you please go buy something for me? Because they might give you a discount and not me.
yeah,
So I
that's-
can win at Stardew Valley is what I'm hearing.
Yes, you can win at
you can
Stardew
win
Valley.
at Stardew Valley,
good.
yeah.
There's
Good.
one thing that doesn't change in the multiplayer, though. So if you've played Stardew Valley, Vi, you have, so you know this. The whole end goal of the game, or at least to get to the end content, is to finish the community center, putting together a series of items that you've collected and giving it to the community center, to the magical fairies within, to unlock things.
It is a rundown building that at the beginning is like visibly falling apart and has like cobwebs and stuff. And then you get like people to pitch in and like you do all your tasks, and as you do those things, you start to like repair the building.
So like you grow some shared space based on how you interact
Yeah,
with the
Exactly,
community.
yeah.
So the community center tasks aren't changed at all in multiplayer. You can both contribute to them, and it does make them a lot easier, I will admit.
Okay.
The other thing being, though, remember how I asked that question about if you open your inventory, should the game pause? Well, in single-player Stardew, it does. When you're doing anything in a menu, the game is paused. In multiplayer, it's not. At all. Which means the average day length goes from above 20 minutes to, it's 15. You better get
Yeah.
everything done in 15 minutes, or the day ends.
That's rough.
Which I like, but it does mean my fishing speedrun doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Which I did speedrun making it to level 10 fishing, I will admit.
I'm
So-
kind of used to games being like one set amount of time. Again, fighting game background. I like that more. Like you got a time pressure on you to do the thing. You can't be going off to like go deal with rice you're cooking or whatever in the background. Like you got to focus on the game. Then
Yeah.
I feel more immersed in that sort of situation.
Yeah.
I quite like it personally, but it is a bit weird when I say like, oh, I'm going to go grab a glass of water, and, well, the game is playing while I'm getting my glass of water.
You can't just open your inventory to be a pause menu anymore.
Yeah, you actually have to wait till the end of the day where there's a brief pause where everybody clicks next day.
Yeah.
So that's a game that did single player into multiplayer well. And you can tell they did kind of think of the multiplayer from the beginning. But remember that question about cutscenes that you get? So
Yeah.
Stardew Valley has cutscenes for when you're interacting with the villagers and befriending them. And yes, everybody can get those cutscenes. Even if they don't really work anymore, everybody can get those cutscenes. And that was just a decision the developers made, right? Where everybody should get to experience that growth in their relationship in a normal way, right? But that's an easy game to make multiplayer. So I want to flip the script a bit. Have both of you played or at least seen gameplay of Skyrim?
Yeah.
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 You both now have the task of taking Skyrim and making it multiplayer. For the sake of argument, let's say you're building a multiplayer mod.
There are multiplayer mods to
There are.
Skyrim.
So let's say you're building one now, and let's say you have all the coding background already. How would you make Skyrim multiplayer?
I mean, at this point, I don't think anyone is playing Skyrim for the story. So, like, that kind of gets rid of the whole story aspect of Skyrim. You
It
can
does,
just put,
but the
like,
story still leads to progression in the game. You still have to do the story for progression. So here's like one of the easier questions. That whole quest about going to Whiterun and reporting reporting the dragon you saw and fighting the dragon. How do you handle that in multiplayer?
because there are two totally different paths you can take.
Well,
You
that's
could
after
go-
the dragon you get those paths. So this is still the tutorial missions where you go and fight
No,
the
I'm
dragon.
saying even during that tutorial mission, like when you're in Helm's Deep, that's
That's definitely
Helgen.
Lord
That's
of the Rings, 100%. Yeah.
Helgen.
What was it?
Helgen. Helgen. Helgen.
Helgen. Helgen. Yeah, Helgen. Yeah, when the dragon attacks, you can either go with the Jarl you wake up with, Stormcloak.
With the Stormcloak and the Imperial.
Yeah.
But I actually mean much later when you go to Whiterun and report to the Jarl that a dragon attack happened, and then they say, we're going on a scouting mission, and that's where you kill your first dragon and understand that you're the Dragonborn.
Mm-hmm.
How should that mission play out in multiplayer?
Well, that's kind of difficult because the Dragonborn being you is like a big part of what Skyrim is. Like you're the only Dragonborn, so you
Being
guess
a
it-
pair of Dragonborns would be very funny, though.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of come down to like, have you ever played Monster of the Week?
I have not.
The tabletop RPG? There's one class in it. So Monster of the Week is this game that's kind of based on like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer and like Supernatural TV shows. So the idea is like every session is an episode and you play like, you know, we kill a monster this week, right? And one of the classes that you can play is the Chosen One. And in the instructions for it, they're specifically like, if you play this kind of character, your whole game is about whatever this character's arc is. And I feel like Skyrim is very like that, right? You're going to have one person who is like sort of chosen, and then anybody who joins in is then therefore support. So I think you just have to make a choice up front when you're doing this mod of like, okay, do we just like make this game, do we just sort of duplicate it and now there's two of you, or, you know, do you get a sidekick?
the Chosen Two.
Yeah. Like the Chosen Two, or do you do Batman and Robin? Like,
yeah, and the duplicating the quest versus you just do it together. gets harder when you remember your friend could just run away.
Yes.
I can't remember, Riften. They can run away to Riften.
You could, at any point right now, you could key smash something and then just read the consonants, and you would be able to come up with a Skyrim sounding place name.
That's true. But they could run to an entirely different region while you're doing that quest, and you become the Dragonborn. Do they have to go do that quest now? Does that work? If they start the quest, can you go back and join to help them with the quest?
Yeah, this is such a complicated question that you've posed.
Well, let's think about something else now. Let's say joining the Assassins group, which I can't remember what it's called now, Silent Hand or something. Black Hand, something like that. You're joining the Assassins group, and you are going through a quest line that has their entire base get destroyed at some point. If your friend wants to do that later, can they? Or does the quest get marked as complete for both parties?
I think we got to do D&D rules here. If it happens in the world,
It's
happening in the world. Like,
and admittedly, that's probably the right call. Shared quests.
the problem here is you get into a very meta, like, all right, split timelines? Like, and that's game breaking.
Yeah, you
like,
probably want to avoid that.
Yeah.
So the answer of shared quests because events in the world depend on the quests makes sense, right? But now, let's say you go and do the first half of the quests. How do you stop the other player from coming in and doing the other half of the quests, having not been involved?
I was about to bring that up. Yeah.
Or is it okay if they do that?
Well, I mean, if your second player is in the Assassin's Den when it gets destroyed, are they dead? Are they just gone?
do they just sort of get teleported out of the... Here's the thing.
You can kill them and they have to respawn.
Yeah, I feel like the right answer here is that you just make a choice, but you just make that choice consistently.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, they're inside when the thing falls apart, they respawn next to me. That's just how it works, and we can have fun with that, and it's like a little glitch that just sort of happens. Right?
Yeah. A general, really easy way to do it is to say quests are shared, but continuing quests can only be done by the person who started the continuing quests, unless both of them were in the quest location at the same time. So it marks who was there for this quest, they may continue the line. And if you break away from the line, you're now away from the quest entirely.
And
as they
it, like
progress.
if you start a continuous quest and then you realize that like, oh, it's too hard for me, or you just get stuck and you want your buddy to come help you with it, then you should be able to do that.
They can join in, but you still have to be there as
Yeah.
the person leading the quest.
Yeah.
They can come kill guys on the side, but they are not
Yeah.
like the whatever the assassin's name is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever they are. They're not.
Yeah.
They're a helper more than anything. And that's actually the hard question about making a multiplayer Skyrim. Making the gameplay work in multiplayer is pretty trivial, except for the fact that at some point having two people doing dragon shouts is a little powerful, I will
Hilarious.
say, and really funny, really funny, but overall not bad.
Yeah.
Right? And events that are player specific, such as going to the Greybeards, you could probably have desynced a little bit. Each player can do it on their own time, but they both have to do it until you get to a quest that requires both of them and just say, you both have to be here to do this quest type thing. Right?
I think the thing that Stardew Valley does really well is they set up at the very beginning, like, you're going to make a choice about this, right? And you're going to do it now while you're making all the choices. And I think any Skyrim mod that would make it multiplayer would be the same thing, right? We've made a choice about this quest, and now you have the option to either start it together, one of you start it, etc. But, events happen within the timeline. Like, just make a choice and just run with it.
So I'm going to throw another game out there that's hard, because what I'm really trying to get at here is, why is it hard to make player games multiplayer? So let's make an even harder set of decisions for kind of like a final example of converting a game kind of live. How would you make multiplayer Undertale?
You just wouldn't, right?
I just simply would not.
But why not?
Because it's entirely story driven.
Yeah. The whole point is like, it's like flipping through a picture book and making choices. Like, it would be the equivalent of sitting beside somebody and trying to do a choose your own adventure book.
While they're also flipping the pages specifically, like not just
Yeah, like it just wouldn't work. Like okay, we know choose your own adventure books, yeah? Like, it would be the equivalent of being like, okay, I'm going to make a choice, flip to page 12, right? And if you're like, no, I want to do the other one.
I would like to flip to page 6.
Okay, well, why don't we just tear the book in half? Here, you have that one, and we'll just go from here. Like, it just doesn't work, right? Like,
So
Yeah,
did
how are you
know-
going to take the genocide route and the pacifist route?
Yeah,
at the same
exactly. How
time?
am I
That's
going to
just
smash
not-
the mercy button while also killing everybody? Like it.
So there is an Undertale multiplayer mod.
What?
It came out a few months ago.
No, there isn't.
So now we're going to start answering these questions.
No.
Uh,
Guy, you're lying to me.
No, this is a thing.
No, you've got your lying face on. This is
No,
fake.
this is actually a thing. So, Undertale multiplayer mod.
Yeah.
Here's how they beat it. You spawn in the game, you're all together. Now,
Okay.
we know that the fights...
Wait, you're all? This is not just like one other human person?
It's up to 4.
Oh my god.
4 different... What's the
4
main
different fallen
character's
children.
name?
Frisk.
Frisk, right.
4
yeah.
different frisks. So, you're all there. And now, the big thing about Undertale, really that makes this hard, is that the battles are consequential. The events of the battles matter. So what happens when you get... Well, the Flowey battle is the easiest, the first one. You get into the Flowey battle together, because there's nowhere else to go, right? You have the box that the heart moves around in for your fights. For those who haven't played Undertale, the way the game works is it's a bit of a bullet hell with your character in a box with attacks coming in around the box, and you have to dodge it as your little heart, right? They just put all 4 of them in the box. So now how do you handle health? Shared health.
No.
That
With
sounds
4
awful.
times as
This
much.
is- no,
with
no,
4
no.
times as much.
That's still bad. That's still so bad. No. No. That doesn't...
No, absolutely.
No, absolutely
that's-
not. Like,
yeah.
And
yes, no. Like,
when you're choosing what you have to do in fights, now I'm going to say you should do it a little differently than they did. It's consensus choosing. So you vote on your action. Either you vote on fight, vote on mercy, vote on act. And if it's a tie, deal with it. The way they actually do it is the first person to hit the button gets it, which is hilarious, but that's
okay,
because it's a
okay,
mod.
Hang on, yeah. This is because it's a mod. The amount of, like, humor that could come out of that game would be, like... that's the one I want to play online with my Discord friends. Like, that's
Voting on mercy versus... Like, you're playing against, like, Toriel. All your friends
Democratic
kill
Toriel.
Toriel. You're like,
You're like, dang. Yeah.
But genuinely speaking on how you would make a game like Undertale
Yeah.
multiplayer, this is actually not that far off, right? You would have multiple players who have to do the fights together and make a choice on what they're going to do together and are both being attacked. And if either of you die, that's the game over screen, right? Cutscenes also would have to then be shared, and locations would have to be shared. And a game like Undertale is really starting to not sound very fun multiplayer. No. You could also
No.
make it not shared, but you could do the Skyrim method of the events still happen if you're not there. But you know, you can't go talk to Papyrus while someone else is starting the Papyrus fight,
Yeah.
right? So you have to have a degree of things have to happen in some order, and you have to make decisions on that. And a game like Undertale, as it's designed, would be very hard to make multiplayer.
Yeah. Like, I think, like, Undertale is just sort of all decisions. Like,
And every decision is a point that's hard to make in multiplayer.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a trend that we're noticing here. Ignoring that I could keep talking about the Undertale multiplayer mod, it does work to the end of the game in all variations of the game. The trend tends to be at this point that if the game depends on the decisions being made very directly, explicitly cutscene based, basically if it's a story based game, the more story there is, the harder it is to make the game multiplayer. I think that gives a pretty
Yeah.
overall generalization of it.
and I think anything that sort of has a level is way easier to make multiplayer.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm going to ask a question now, and this is going to be like a very, let's see where this discussion kind of goes. Do you think there's a difference in genres for games that are easy to make multiplayer and games that are hard to make multiplayer? Are certain genres just easier to throw in players after the fact, or much harder to throw in after the fact?
I definitely think there is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at like 4X strategies, like we were talking about this before the episode started. If you're looking at like a Civ 5, like you're playing against others anyway, even in like the one-player version. Like you're playing against AI, so like just swapping out an AI for a actual player doesn't really change the game much.
Yeah, I 100% think that there is easier games to make multiplayer and games that are, I would say, impossible or that just make the game not worth playing.
Yeah, so we've
Yeah.
kind of said adventure games are probably easy to make multiplayer, and
Yeah.
RPGs are hard to make multiplayer.
Yeah, anything turn-based is probably easier to add a multiplayer into because you just add another turn.
Yeah, strategy games probably pretty easy.
Yeah.
So what about the platformer genre?
Oh,
What's your opinions?
generally pretty easy. Like if you look at like Mario, they added a second like Luigi into that.
Yeah.
The only thing that's like causes arguments is when you get to the end flag and then your sibling dies. Like,
Yeah.
But also that's just hilarious.
Yeah, but also that's just good. Yeah, like I feel like a platformer is probably one of the easiest. Like you just add another dude.
So how easy do you think it'd be to make Mario Odyssey a platformer?
Oh yeah, 3D platformers. Yeah, that's a completely different.
Or make it a platform, make it multiplayer, sorry.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, no, that's a completely different.
Because the game is so desynced in collecting stars, or moons, you probably could just add another person and just have a shared moon count. Admittedly, not that hard, right? So there definitely is a difference in which games are easy to make multiplayer and which games are hard to make multiplayer. And I think it's very clear by now why it's so hard to make games multiplayer. So let me switch this up. We're coming into about our last 10 minutes of the discussion, and I want just to give like a fun, let's just see where this kind of goes type question. What games do you really wish you could play multiplayer?
Oh, this is going to surprise absolutely nobody who listens to this show. I would like a playable Zelda in Breath of the Wild, and I want... No. Okay, Sam got really excited.
That sounds sick.
Yeah,
Sam is very excited.
Sam's
I
very-
rolled
no,
my
no,
eyes.
No. This is perfect. I want a playable Zelda, and I want to be able to play her after you beat the game. Like, I want that to be the reward, right?
I get what you're saying, yeah.
You like, release her and kill Ganon, and then it's like, and now you get Zelda, and you can go explore because you've
And
already...
like the story continues to
Yeah.
progress after Breath of the Wild 2 ends.
I don't think it needs to necessarily, because we already get Breath of the Wild 2. So, but like if you left side quests, well, now you've got Zelda to come help you collect fucking crickets. Like, you know?
You got her to pick up the Korok seeds.
Yeah, exactly. You guys can just go like romp around everywhere, and it can be like really, really good, right?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
legitimately.
that sounds wicked.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Asked and answered.
Asked and answered. Sam, do you have any examples of games you'd like to see multiplayer?
I mean, that now. I couldn't think of anything.
Besides that.
So,
I
No.
have an example.
Oh, okay.
So this is a slightly off-topic one. Oh, off-topic, like not Legend of Zelda. I played an indie puzzle game a while ago that was about hacking people's computers, like through a terminal. It was basically a Linux terminal simulator hacking, and it turned into a murder mystery puzzle game throughout the game.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah. That game originally promised to have multiplayer. And the idea was you'd be going through quests either cooperative, you're both working towards the goal and can simultaneously do things. So the quest could depend on you two doing two different time-sensitive actions that are
That's
impossible
fun.
alone.
That's wicked.
Or competitive, where you're both trying to solve the problem first and can actively screw the other person over. For example,
a game you can win, Sam.
Good.
Like this was actually the plan. They were going to do multiplayer for this game,
Yeah.
but it never came to fruition. Where one of the ideas was, if you hack into a computer and then your opponent gets into that computer later, checks the logs and sees that you didn't delete them, they can start working backwards from how you got
that's
there
cool.
to eventually hack you and shut down your computer, forcing you to fix it while they're solving the problems.
That's fun.
And that's so cool.
Here's another. There's a little indie game that I just started playing that's called, I think it's called Down in Bermuda. Definitely has the word Bermuda in it, and it's just sort of a puzzle game with levels where you play as like this little downed pilot in this kind of weird fantasy world where there are islands in the Bermuda Triangle and everything's like fun. Cool. And you just like go around with very, very little instruction, try to figure out how to like end this puzzle. So it's like, oh, what if happens if I flip this switch? What happens if I like burst this like bubble on the ocean floor? Like it's very much that. It's kind of like an explorer, like you kind of explore the environment and then the puzzle reveals itself to you. It's not
like a point and click type of thing?
Yeah, something like that. And I think that would be really fun as a 2-player because I always find myself being like, where is this third key, right? And if I had a buddy, I think that would be good. I think my answer is any game where I'm sitting there and I'm going, man, I wish I had a buddy for this. That's a game that I want to be multiplayer.
So let me throw out a fun factor in this conversation. Remember how I mentioned Mario Odyssey earlier?
Yeah.
Did you know that game does have multiplayer?
I did actually. Small Ants
Except
channel.
the second player plays as Small Ants is a mod.
okay. All right. Yeah, we're talking about the official.
The official multiplayer for Mario Odyssey is the second player is the hat.
No, I have heard this. Yes. Yeah.
I played it. The second player is the
It's the hat. Yeah.
You can do some crazy tricks with
With
like,
multiplayer
the
hat.
Multiplayer hat, but like other than that, like it's not.
It is
other player.
It is So as a descriptor of like multiplayer modes like this, it's my favorite little brother mode.
Yes.
You have your
Yeah.
5-year-old
Yeah.
brother
Yeah.
come in, wants to play the game with you, and you give him a controller and you say, "Go ahead, little bro," and
Yeah.
he controls the hat.
This is what I was talking about earlier before we started recording with is it Galaxy that does this where you just have one thing that like collects stars?
Yes, in
Yeah.
Galaxy, where you can
Yeah.
point your Wiimote to collect stars that
Yes.
the other person
That one
plays.
doesn't work for the little brother mode though, because they don't have something on the screen that really moves. Like they have the pointer, but like that's not going
This
to be
is-
enough for them.
Grab
They're just
the
going to eat your
stars-
star
the
bits.
stars, little
This is
brother.
actually not little brother mode. This is like grandpa mode.
Grandpa mode.
Grandpa
Like they don't
mode.
really
Like,
know
you-
how.
How
to-
You
does this
wanna
change the
show-
channel? Collecting
Yeah.
bits.
You want to show your grandpa like, oh, there's this cool game I've been playing. You can play too. Just move this and collect stuff, and it's easy. Yeah. I want a buddy in Dark Souls, but I don't know.
Dark Souls has a buddy mode,
Dark Souls has a buddy mode.
Dark Souls has a buddy mode.
just not the
Yeah.
first one.
Like
I need
Dark
the-
Souls 2 and Dark Souls
I need
3.
somebody to come play Dark Souls with me because I'm so stuck.
But it's not actually multiplayer. It's like they can join your game as a spirit and help you, but
Perfect.
it doesn't progress their game when they do it.
Wicked. I don't need
they have to
anybody
have
else to
finished
be
the
able to
game
do
already.
this. Great. Somebody finish Dark Souls so I can have help.
There's like a legend of one guy who I think Pothead was his name or something, because like he wears just a pot on his head and then like is naked otherwise.
Is
Like
this,
that's
a,
his
is this like
avatar.
a lore thing?
No, this is a human being.
Oh.
I think it is now a lore thing.
It is
as
now a
well.
lore thing.
Okay.
In Elden Ring, there's a guy called the Elevator Inspector, and every time you summon him to fight him, he'll go to the nearest elevator and just stand around looking at it and hitting it with items, and he will not fight you unless you hit him, in which he will one-shot you.
Excellent.
Whoa.
That's I love when people come up with like, this is so tangential, but I love when people just come up with bits in like online games. Like I just love when that's a thing, when there's like lore based on something a person chose to do that just has nothing to do with
They were just
gameplay.
screwing around.
Yeah.
They were not like trying to do anything.
Yeah, so I'm just like, I'm gonna put a pot on my head and like not wear anything else. That's gonna be my whole thing. Like
Also-
that's just so good.
Someone did I think Elden Ring made a build that was like heavy armor plus heavy shield plus only shield attacks plus max strength, max constitution kind of thing, and he called himself the Wall,
Yeah.
and he's indestructible because
Yes.
100% defense build only.
Look, we know this from like playing D&D, but I am always going to let you commit to the bit, right? You want to build the most based character because you had like one idea. I'm going to let you min-max the absolute crap out of that. Like you just get to do it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
That's
just
the
make
best way to
just
play,
make
honestly.
broken shit. Like I don't really care.
As long as
So-
it's got a bit, as long as it's got
As
a
long
thing
as it's
to
a
it.
bit, yeah, we're not just doing this because you want to be like the most powerful paladin. I need to know
boring.
that you are the most powerful paladin because you really like I don't know, like a particular kind of frog. Like that's what I'm here for.
Your goal is to protect a particular type of frog.
Yes.
Like you go into this environment as
Yeah.
like a nature conservatist.
Yeah.
Like your entire goal for beating the
Yeah.
big bad guy is
Is
not
like-
to
is-
save the humans. It's because there's like a
It's-
frog colony. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's because it's the get out of my swamp, but it's not my swamp. It's these frogs, and you're a fire breathing dragon. Get out.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's 100% it. That's also my next character.
Wonderful. So that brings us about to the end for today. We have a couple minutes left. So as a summary, we still have to finalize answering the question, why is it so hard to make single player games multiplayer? And I think the long and the short of it after today's episode is because story matters and because hardware is difficult to work with.
And I think because story matters, like decisions fundamentally matter in video games, right? We've talked about like
Agency.
the reason we do this is to have agency to make choices that you maybe wouldn't make otherwise in your real life,
Yeah.
right? And if those decisions suddenly don't mean anything, when you are involving another person of like your community, you're kind of playing with like why we play games, and that's why they aren't fun if you do it wrong.
But on the other side of this all, there are many ways to do the multiplayer. And when you can't add in a whole nother player, you can make Little Brother mode.
Yes.
Or you can make your Dark Souls helper mode.
Yeah, my hot take on making things multiplayer is if you can't do the multiplayer well, just give me a good little brother mode.
Good little brother.
And I do like Little Brother mode. And at some point, we will have to do an episode on asynchronous play, where one person plays, but the game's built in such a way that non-players can interact with to help the player, which I think is something that we'll have to talk about later.
Sure.
But that brings us about to the end. So final answer, decisions matter.
I also want to say if my little brother is listening, you're much better at video games than I am, and we actually just need an older sister mode.
If my little brother is listening, opposite of that,
Sorry. Opposite of that, you're the best at games.
I'm the best at games. I win.
You win. So, Any other comments? Any other conversations before we end?
No, I'm good. Thank you for coming, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for
joining
having
in.
me.
Yeah.
Do you want to sell any of your social medias before we go? Anywhere people can
Do you
find
stream
you?
on Twitch?
I guess at Third Year Sam on Instagram. That's about it.
Cool.
Which you're a 5th year now.
Yeah, I am a 5th year now, so gotta change that. It's been like 2 years that I should have changed that.
No, it's commitment to the bit now.
It is
It
commitment
is.
to the bit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end up in like grad school. It's gonna come back.
Yeah.
It's
with
gonna come back.
Third year grad school.
Third year grad school.
Perfect.
Third year grad school comes
Okay.
back. All right. Well, that's about everything. I'm Gaia,
I've been Vi.
I've been Sam.
and we'll see you next time. And if you want to hear more from us or listen to past episodes, tune in live every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic on CHSR 97.9 FM in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And if you're online, you can listen live at chsrfm.ca or on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next time. Sam, could you do some mic tests for me?
Sure. So looking down the runway, we're looking at a wind of 40 knots blowing southeast.
Why is your default test about weather?
You know, you gotta tell the pilots who's.
Do you just really like planes?
I guess I don't know. My
Okay.
uncle's.